showing up every day and feeling like you've done a good day's work or feeling like you've done something that was going to make a difference is much easier and a lot more satisfying. I think we've painted this picture of happiness that says we have a lot of money or we've done a lot of things, but I really do think that real success comes from I'm very content.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large.
Hey, Conscious Habit listeners. Today, Amy and I are talking to my longtime friend, Tom Barrett of Barrett Works. Tom is a corporate growth and change agent. He works with high-performing teams, helping teams be more high-performing, have self-directed operations. He'd been in the consulting space for a long time. And in our episode today, Tom is going to talk about just the power of storytelling in coaching and development. He talks about how we can help others get unstuck and maybe even ourselves on focusing on the small things that create the big wows for us. We also get into all things consciousness and ways that can impact our lives. So really looking forward to you listening to this episode. Enjoy. Hey, Conscious Habit listeners, we are so excited. This is Des. I'm here with Amy and man, good friend of mine, Tom Barrett of Barrett Works. He's had that organization for 15 years. Tom and I think, have known each other for those entire 15 years. And I've just had the pleasure of knowing Tom, working along beside him. And one of the things that I absolutely love about Tom is this is literal. Every single time I talk to Tom, I learn about something new that he's done in the world. And how many people can you say that about? I'm absolutely amazed at the work that he does. And some of the things to listen for in our conversation, talk about knowing the power of storytelling and really being able to connect that to conscious leadership. Tom does a really great job of that. He also has just a very strong history of personal development, mindfulness, maybe some things that you are not familiar with. And I love that he'll be able to, again, to make those connections for us in the ways that we frame and guide and use those things as a compass for our lives and in our work. And I think you'll really love just how he is able to, and I told Tom this the other day, Tom just has a brilliant way of, I think, coming up underneath people and lifting them up in a way that might be surprising for them, but really provides a way for others to really see their gifts and what they bring to the world and then go out and make it happen. So, Tom, we are super excited to have you on the podcast today.
Desi, I'm glad to be here. Amy, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
So, Tom, I'm going to kick things off right with the storytelling aspect of your work, because I know that you integrate that and it really shapes your approach to working with others. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and maybe also make the connection to how you see that as an approach to conscious leadership.
When I first get a client, I can usually understand pretty much what they're looking for. And most of the clients I get to have been stuck. They've been 3 to 5 years, they haven't grown sales, or they haven't been able to make a leap that they feel that they should make. And usually within a month, I can understand what's holding them back. The difficulty is it's usually them. And then how do I paint a picture for them that says, if you can see this, you can get there? And so through storytelling, you can't have people make a huge leap of faith. They have to take a lot of small little baby steps. And so I think what I do well is understand, if you take this one step, you'll get a little bit closer, and then the next step, and then the next step. And that leads to the breakthrough, or as I call it, the big wow. When I was a kid, we used to talk about having big wows. And I set up big wows for myself back when I was in my 20s. And it usually comes after something that didn't go as well as you expected, or a disaster. And so when I was about 20 years old, I didn't do well in college. And I said, well, what am I going to do with my life? which is a common question, isn't it? And at 20, what do you know about life?
Or 40 and 55.
Or
and
60, right? So I set some life goals up at that point, and one of them was to continuously grow and develop. So always look to push my envelope and to step out into what I'm uncomfortable with. So I was very, very shy. And so I got into sales, which forced me to get out of being shy, or at least I don't think you ever get out of it. I think you just learn to live with it. So I think that's what I do. I think that's what you mean, Des, when you say I come up from underneath people. They don't see the big change that's going on until after they've made it. And sometimes those changes are not pleasant. You have to deal with your own shadows. You have to deal with what you haven't been dealing with for the last 40 years. So yeah, that's the hard part about personal development. But I like doing the personal development in the context of business, because in the context of business or in your professional life, there's something that you can grab onto that you can see results almost immediately. Whereas when you work on strictly personal development, it's hard for people to see the changes that are coming. But we combine the business development with the personal development, and that's when people get the big wow.
I think that's so true, because I think our default in business is we can qualify, we can make those incremental changes in quantitative. I'm curious about an example of how you use storytelling, because I love that as an impetus for that motivation to do what it takes in that self-reflection to look at the dark side and to continue through those small steps that allow you to get to big wows.
Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing I've been told, because I don't think you ever really know yourself well, you only know yourself through others. I think the biggest thing that I've been told is you ask really good questions. So I was working with an executive director of a nonprofit athletic association there in Indianapolis, and his board had challenged him to double the business. And he was fighting them, not publicly fighting them, but just resisting, the unconscious, I don't really want to do this. And so you don't do it. And I asked him, I said, so what's holding you back? Why are you so afraid of this? And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, you ask really good questions. And I think that's the key, is you ask the questions that bring people around. You cannot pontificate and tell people what they should do. Should's one of those words that turns people off just to begin with. And if you replace should with could, it's transformational.
So true. I just had a conversation with someone the other day about shoulding all over themselves, which I think we all three talk about in our work a lot, but it was kind of a new concept for her. She's like, ooh, I'm writing that down.
And I'll tell people, I want you to ban that word. At first, I want you to see how often you say should over the next week. Usually I coach clients once a week. See how often you say should. And then the next step is, let's replace it with could or would. And it brings a level of personal responsibility to the owner when they own it. And it creates a huge change.
What a good reflection of invisible hurdles we create for ourselves. And whether it is just rules that we made up and we kind of live according to that don't serve us, or whatever that protection is. And I'm curious, Tom, you mentioned in the work that you're able to do in the world, and we're grateful you do this work in the world. Thank you. There needs to be a lot of people doing conscious work in the world, that people are at a stuck point and they want to see themselves somewhere else, or they have a vision for getting somewhere else, but they don't know how to get there. What have you found? Because our listeners are mostly owners, executives. It's likely that they are currently feeling stuck somewhere, or they can relate to this stuck feeling. Do you kind of have your top 3 areas that tend to be those invisible hurdles for people?
I think there's at least 2. So I think culturally we have biases, what we think we should have versus what we do have. So I think the cultural, social biases that we have are worth examining. And so I think two of the biggest ones that we have, and if you watch advertising and television and TV and listen to podcasts and stuff, the biggest thing people complain about is I don't have enough time or I don't have enough money. If you turn that paradigm upside down and understand you do have as much time as everybody else has in a single day, what are you going to do with that time? And what are you going to do with that time to make something big happen? And so many of my clients are too busy working in the business to really step back and work on the business. And, if you look at your automobile, which is one of the most expensive items you have personally, and it sits idle more than 90% of the time. And we have a tendency to think if we aren't busy, we aren't getting anything done. But it's in those moments of pause or retreat that you can really think about the big picture things. But you have to make that space because that space won't make itself. And the other thing we seem to have is a severe reflection about how if only I had more money, if I could get this done or I could get that done, failing to realize that no matter how much you have in time or money, there's always constraints. And so as a leader, your role is to how do you manage those constraints and inspire people? Because through inspiration, and we've seen it in our lives, through inspiration, it's amazing what can be accomplished. But it's not through perspiration. But somehow we feel we have to perspire to make it worthwhile.
No pain, no gain.
Uh-huh.
One of the stories that we make up.
Yeah, one of the biases that we have. If it doesn't hurt, then it's not good enough. Or I don't deserve this.
I think that's a big one. Yeah. The worthiness factor creates a lot of excuses. And we had Lisa Bedell on the podcast who she had this great phrase that reminds me of what you mentioned, Tom. And she's like, too many people live by the clock and not by their compass. And like we make time carry the burden for so much. And really it's that we aren't aligned with what we really want. And so like to your point, we don't spend enough time being and slowing down. And so I find the best coaches have done the work themselves. Like they have like gone down the road. They've done it wrong. They've smashed their face. They're like, this isn't working. They find a better way. And then they teach a better way. Has that been your path? Or were you like, nope, I've pretty much gotten it right since I was 20 years old?
I don't think I'd ever have gotten it right.
Me either. Good company.
When I was 20 years old, so I grew up in the 70s, Vietnam War was going on, civil rights had happened just 15 miles from my house, women's rights were happening. It was a time of just tremendous transition. And during that time, it was also a time of tremendous inquiry. And so I was looking at a lot of the alternate Eastern philosophies throughout all of that time. And that started me on kind of like a journey to start to understand what's the best story or paradigm for my life. And then I've gone through a series of jobs, positions, business ownerships, self-reflection. I've done an awful lot of work on myself. And it continues. It just keeps on going.
And how have you bridged that self-development, Tom, into how you lead transformations in business? Because you do that a lot, and breakthroughs for people.
I think the big thing is to withhold judgment on a personal level. So I have no vested interest in the outcome as well. So by letting go of the outcome, all I can do is the best I can do today. And I guess I got that from raising the kids. It's like, there's no manual for raising children, and each one of the children are different, and they all have their independent streak. And I took an attitude that my children were here to help raise me and give me deeper understanding. And that doesn't mean that what they always did was right. That doesn't mean what business owners always do that's correct. You don't withhold judgment on everything. But on a personal level, yes, you are doing the best you can right now. And then how do we take it to the next level? What would be your big wow that you could say, oh, I can't believe I did this? And when I'm interviewing employees, I often ask that question. It usually starts out, what was your favorite thing in school? What do you do for hobbies? And then what's a big wow in your life? And one of the women I was interviewing for a sales position, I'm not sure how old she was. She was probably mid-50s or so. But her big wow in life was she bicycled across Europe with her son.
That's a pretty big wow.
And she had just recently done that. This is a big wow, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Ladies, imagine taking time away to work on you. Meditation, yoga, transformational work, a chance to have grand adventures and build lasting relationships. Desiree Garcia and I founded High Vibe Tribe Retreats to create just that. And if you're curious about joining us on our next retreat, head over to highvibetriberetreat.com, link in the show notes.
It's so interesting because like we can talk about withholding judgment. And, I was reflecting on applying that in my life, and I can think about 30 judgments that I've had about myself today, let alone applying it like out in my world. That's not an easy thing to do.
Right. And I think what helped me a lot was to understand judgments for projections. So I'm projecting onto you my judgment because that's what I see or don't want to see in myself. So, and taking that, and that's a hard lesson to learn because it doesn't feel very good the first time you get exposed to it. But it does help you understand better that all of us are different. All of us have different backgrounds, different life experiences. And just being able to say, I accept you as you are, not as I think you should be, creates a tremendous bond and trust with people. And people want to feel good. And so making them feel good sincerely makes a huge difference. So when I had about 100 employees, and oftentimes I'll tell clients, I want you to do this because a lot of times they don't get out and see the people who are making the business work for them. And it's all about people. I want you to go out and catch 5 people doing something well, not doing great. It's like the sales achievement, salesperson of the year. It's like, okay, big wow. But somebody that just, did well on the telephone. So I used to run a call center. And so I would listen to the agents. And when they had a really nice call, I tap them on the shoulder and I say, hey, I really appreciate what you did. And I had an attitude that everybody that worked with me and not necessarily for me had something special. And recognizing that was usually more inspiring. Took about 20 years to get to that point.
Yeah, right. Stubbing our toes and scraping our knees. It makes me think of, in some feedback work that I do, there's something called P&R, positive to negative ratio. And in our work, we should be giving 3 positives for every, a constructive feedback. And what I've always found fascinating is in our personal lives, it should be 5 to 1. And I'm like, and I'll be the first one to say I get an F- when it comes back to my personal life. And I'm like, and I know the numbers, I know the stats, I know that it makes, to your point, Tom, it makes a huge difference. When you have someone who's acknowledging your efforts and you start to see the belief that they have in you. I can remember when one of my boss's mentors did that, and I was like, I was going to run through a brick wall for her because I just wanted to live into who I thought she thought I was.
Yeah. I had one of the same employee that bicycled across Europe. She told me after I left the job and went somewhere else, she said I was the hardest boss she ever had to work for. And it's like, really, why? You had such high expectations for us. So
Borrowed belief's pretty powerful, though. I mean, I love that of like, who sees something in you don't see in yourself. I think we all have those stories that have followed us into our work. And Tom, you made mention, I love that you create this safe space for people. I mean, it's psychological safety, which Des teaches in the world, which is really just what an honor it is to hold that space for somebody, I'm sure. I love that you accept people for where they are. And my mind instantly goes to, because I think all of us work with a lot of high achievers. And there's this thing that high achievers have is like they are plagued by their high achievement and all of the judgments they have for themselves of feeling like I have to high achieve in order to prove my worthiness or my goodness or to earn my relationship with myself. And yet they're plagued by that, but simultaneously terrified of who they will be if they stop high achievement. And so since people bring you in to help them get to this new place, which in itself is like, it's a level of achievement, right? What is your coaching style to help them both create a resonance and acceptance with themselves on their path to breaking through to new levels to hit these wows?
What I try to do is get them to do it without them really knowing about it. So ask them to do one little thing at a time. Since I was a teenager, I was coaching youth ice hockey when I was like 18 years old. And so the thing with coaching, and just like with a baby, when a baby first starts to walk, nobody says, "Oh, you dumb baby, you know you're too young to walk. Just stay down for now." You give them encouragement. And, when you're coaching children, it's pretty easy to see they don't have the same emotional level. They don't have the same ability that you would, that you'd like to see them get to. So you have to paint a picture of them that says, okay, here's what you need to do. Because all the kids in ice hockey want to take slap shots, right? That's the cool, sexy shot. Well, you can't take a slap shot if you don't know how to ice skate, right? So you start off by pushing a chair around the ice, little things like that. It was kind of interesting. Yesterday, I was reading an article about how I think it was Finland, the kids play soccer, but it's not till they're teenagers that they keep score or they have standings. And so I think the competitive nature that we've created here in America, we sometimes lose that joy of just doing it, just being good at what we do and getting better at what we do, and the community that we create with the teamwork that we have. But I thought that was an interesting article. So no standings, no score. You play soccer for 6-7 years, and they put out tremendous soccer players.
What I'm hearing you say is like, instead of getting them to strive for the end goal, it's just like teach them to be good at this thing today. So there's less striving and it's more about just like, let's have fun with the learning process and, get our own level of fundamentals down. And then that will lead us to the big thing, not the striving for it.
Yeah, and I think one of the big misunderstandings about goal setting, because I witnessed that myself, you set a big goal, and then when you achieve it, there usually is a depression that comes afterwards. I had a belief that I wanted to be on the coast of California overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And when I was 25, I got that. And it was like, okay, so now what do I do? And there's a depression that occurs with that. But showing up every day and feeling like you've done a good day's work or feeling like you've done something that was going to make a difference is much easier and a lot more satisfying. I think we've painted this picture of happiness that says we have a lot of money or we've done a lot of things, but I really do think that real success comes from I'm very content. I feel very satisfied, and I still want to do more and do better and continue to grow and develop, but we have an open mind and we show up. We show up every day.
Tom, something I'm really curious about is, and Amy, you got in my head when you were talking to me about the power of aggregated marginal gains, which we can talk about that in a moment. But I want to ask you, Tom, do you think it is difficult for people to recognize the cumulative effect of those small wins?
It's difficult for them to recognize it at the beginning. So I had a sales team in Florida. We had the lowest market share in the country. And our company was based on market share. And so we put a team together. We did team sales, really. And these were all outside salespeople. They all worked remotely. And we changed around our entire distribution network, which was a big deal. And it came with a lot of fear. It took us a year. But at the end of 5 years, we had the largest sales growth and market share growth in the company. And this was a fairly large company. So they felt really good about it. But more importantly, they felt good about the community that they had created with the teamwork on how they were going to execute and implement this change, because it would have been disastrous if it didn't work. It would have cost business. So and they felt great about it during the process. They felt like they were heard, that they participated. Their input was important. And most importantly on teamwork is when you have a consensus-based decision-making process and the team's got the trust as well as the ability to execute. If it doesn't work, they correct very quickly. They won't follow you off a cliff. They'll say, no, don't jump off that cliff.
Yeah, fail fast and iterate.
I'm sure you've experienced with your teamwork and the work you've done with companies.
Yeah, like all the things. And that leads me to another question I wanted to ask is, thinking about your work and like I'm sure listeners are hearing this. Like I hear how intentional and deliberate your words are. And I'm thinking about like what has been one of like working with a client biggest challenge for them and how did you help them overcome it?
For most of my clients, the biggest challenge for them is empowering other people, especially if they've started the business themselves. So when you think about when you first start a business, first you got to have a sale, right? So you got to sell something. And then the next thing is you've got to make it work. So then the operations come in. And as a small business owner, you're doing everything. You're cleaning the floors, you're making the sales, you're, delivering whatever you have to deliver. And it takes a tremendous attention to detail. And then as you hire employees, because you can't do any more, which is usually, when it starts to break down, then you don't allow that employee to use their talents to help you grow. And so when I was hiring employees, I hired people that were better at what they needed to do than I would have been. And I hired them with a complete faith and expectations that they would be better than I would be. And that's why the one woman said, you were the hardest boss I ever worked for. You had such high expectations, right?
I so appreciate, the work that it's clear like your own practices and your own work. And by the way, just to meet men, there's something out there that's like almost this stigma. Like women, I feel like we're open. We're kind of always like, maybe we're taught that from society, like always need a little nip tuck here. We need a little bit, But I so appreciate that you've done that for yourself, that at 20 years old, you had this mentality, a goal of, I always want to be learning and growing. That kind of blows my mind that you had that goal at 20. So good for you. What has been some of the most impactful practices or personal investments that you've made that have helped you be a good mirror and reflection for your clients that you're working with?
Amy, I think working on myself has probably been the biggest part that's helped, and being a little bit insecure. And if we take a look at women, and I used to have a whole presentation about women and the transformational leadership that they provide. And the statistics are pretty amazing. And we're just starting to see now where women are getting into the top echelons of business and in our lives. Being a little bit insecure makes you question and look for how you can do better. And so I think that's probably what I would say, is that I never feel like I'm good enough, but I'll accept that in myself. I'm never going to be perfect, but I'm always going to do my best. And that's the difference. Whereas being perfect, there's no future in that because it's unachievable. But if you say, hey, I really did do well today and I had a good time doing it, and it's just one day at a time, but keeping that big picture out in front of you, that's why you're moving in this direction. That's the important part.
I love that. I may have to write that down as an affirmation.
The affirmations help. One of the best things that's helped me is I journal every day. So I will write 3 pages longhand of just what's ever on my mind. And what that does is it settles me down. So, as you were saying, the biggest critic in my life sits on my left shoulder or my right shoulder, right? Well, that puts that critic right down on a piece of paper. And I very seldom go back. And after I've filled a book, I burn it. So we give it up to the universe.
Oh, I love that. Is it like morning pages from the Artist's
Yeah, morning
Way?
pages. That's where I got it from, the Artist's Way. First 3 months I did it, I said, I don't want to write this crap. And that was all I wrote. That was all I wrote. 3 pages of that. But yeah, it's a good cathartic exercise to start your day off clean. The other thing I also do is I meditate every afternoon. And so that meditation, and I've been meditating since I was a child. I didn't realize it, but I had, because what you do with meditation is you get right in between that point of almost asleep, but not quite. So for me, it takes that subconscious and brings it into consciousness. And it's like a reset on the day. After a 20-minute meditation, I feel like I can just get started all over again. So I've done transcendental meditation now for 12 years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it is such a powerful reset. Amy and I talk a lot about napitation. And like 15, 20 minutes, you don't really fall to sleep, but it's a meditation that just, you're right, gives you just that perfect amount of time. That's a reset.
Yeah, I was reading something about Salvador Dali, who was one of my favorite artists. And what he used to do when he kind of reached a point in his day where he didn't feel like he could go much further, he'd put his elbows on his knees, bend over holding a paintbrush in his hands. And when that paintbrush dropped to the floor, it was time. He knew that he had hit that point. And I always have remembered that.
But that's great. Good visual too.
So that's the storytelling. How do we tell stories, right?
Yeah, right. See, I love that. I'm like hearing all your stories. So Tom, as we wrap things up and bring them to a close, I'd love for you, one of the things we always ask is, to you, what is conscious leadership?
So for me, conscious leadership is building community. So all of business and all of the work that we do is really all about people and connecting people to themselves and to the others, their families, their communities that they work and they live within. Being accepting, understanding, and honest. But I mean, truthfully honest, not on personality, but on practicality.
I love that, which can include vulnerability and.
Yeah, I think one of the big misunderstandings is people, we talk about be in the moment, live for the moment. And yeah, there's a good part of that, but you've also got to paint where you'd like to be into the future too. And the two are not mutually exclusive.
So true. Well, thank you for sharing with us today. It was great to have you on.
Amy, Desi, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in, Conscious Habit listeners. I wanted to leave you with a few takeaways from our conversation with Tom. I love how Tom talked about approaching our development, whether it's our personal development or our career development, and how we work as leaders in our own lives or even as a business, and just having humility and working on ourselves first. A few ways that we can do that. Number one, I love how Tom talked about turning our shoulds into coulds and woulds. Just being aware on a daily, weekly basis how often we use the word should, and then transferring that into a could and would. The second thing is just being keenly aware of our time and money bias, and just how, as Amy said, that can create invisible hurdles for us in our lives. So if we can be aware of those things, then that gives us the power to be able to transcend those hurdles. And the last thing is thinking about how often am I, perhaps on a regular basis, looking to create an environment that is free of judgment. And that judgment it begins with us before we can extend it to others. So that non-judgment begins with us before we can extend it to others.
Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.